Hello, all you On the Ledge subscribers. Yeah, we've been a little quiet lately. Last week we dropped a bonus episode in the feed for you, and I'm glad that you were able to enjoy that. Going to do the same thing today. We're taking a look at Sabrina Nanji's take on Ford Nation's response to the Freedom Convoy. And this is actually part of my daily show, The Daily Brief, and you can find it where you found this podcast. Just look it up and feel free to subscribe. We talk about other stories beyond politics and certainly beyond Queen's Park. But right now we have been consumed, as everyone has been, by the latest developments in the Freedom Convoy. So enjoy this special bonus edition of the Daily Brief for all you On the Ledge listeners. By the way, On the Ledge will be back in your inbox dark and early Friday morning next week, heading into Family Day weekend. Enjoy. Well, here we go. It is a Friday morning here in Toronto, February the 11th. Welcome in. It's the Daily Brief. I'm Dave Trafford. Latest offering from Story Studio Network. Lots going on over there. Just launched a new show today, by the way. Glenn Crowder is in the stable now. Yeah, he's the ski guy. Used to hang around with on News Talk 1010 on the weekends. Glenn's got a podcast now, and it's called Head for the Hills. Imagine that, all about the skiing. So it's a limited series, 6 shows for the season, but get you through the rest of the back half of this snow season. And we're excited to have him among us here working on the Story Studio Network. Yeah, so lots to talk about, and today we'll get back into the fun of the Freedom Convoy. All right, so yesterday, our good friend John Wright was on the podcast, and John Wright is always the numbers guy. He's always the guy who kind of takes the step back, looks at things rationally. He figures it out and takes the pulse of Canadians, and he's been doing that for as long as I've known him, which is, almost 30 years. Yesterday, I saw and heard a different John Wright, and he expressed, I think, a lot of the frustration that many of you are feeling and is being expressed in all kinds of different ways right across the country. We now have the Americans' attention because we've got blockades at various border crossings, and that's costing money and jobs, both in Canada and the United States. The big focus is here in Ontario, and of course, particularly because we are home to the Ambassador Bridge between Windsor and Detroit. Fun fact there, this week I learned that the amount of commerce, international commerce between Canada and the United States, done over that bridge is almost as much trade that the United States does in a year with the UK entirely. That's a lot of trade and truck traffic on one bridge. So that's the effect that it's having. And, a lot of great questions. Where has the Prime Minister been? Where's the leadership been? Where has the Premier of this province, Doug Ford, been? Oddly quiet. Now, I get that they want to sort of, keep things calm. But is that the secret sauce of good leadership in this environment? I'm afraid that the genies are out of the bottle, and we're going to have to chase the genies down. Never mind trying to put them back in the bottle. I don't know how we do that, but we got to contain them at some point. So for that perspective, just in terms of what's going on here in Ontario, we thought we'd get some insights from Sabrina Nanji. She is the founder and the editor at the Queen's Park Observer, joining us this morning. And I should say we are talking before the Premier and the Solicitor General make their specific big announcements about, coulda, woulda, shoulda, desk pounding, I'm sure, are going to come, and calls on this whole thing to end now. What will follow, don't know, but perhaps Sabrina knows that. Good morning, Sabrina. How are you?
Good morning. Happy News Friday.
Yeah.
Another one.
Yeah, well, exactly. Last week it was Suck and Blow Friday, and I think we're still into that kind of on the one hand, particularly in Ottawa, where, we had the federal Conservatives. I guess they were all doing it. The Prime Minister as well. We can't be having this, but we're not doing anything about it. And that has been the theme. And I think at the heart of so much of the frustration on both sides of this, and let's face it, This is a tyranny of the minority right now, but we cannot dismiss it because leadership across the country, but particularly in Ottawa and in Ontario, I think they've let this get way out of hand way too quickly. And I'm not sure there's a path back now or what it might be.
Well, definitely, I'm eager to hear what the premier's got to say a little later. But I think Liberal MVP John Fraser, who was railing against that this week, lack of response from Doug Ford and the Conservatives, he put it best when he said jurisdiction has become a four-letter word. Like there's been so much finger pointing, especially in Ottawa, which admittedly is a little complicated when it comes to policing. Like there's so many different forces there in the National Capital Region and all that. But at the end of the day, you're right. Like the public is just fed up with this. Surprised even that it's gotten to this point. I think what's happening at Ambassador Bridge, just completely choking this like critical trade link with the U.S. That this is the straw that's going to finally break Premier Doug Ford's back here, and I think we're going to see some harsh measures. He's going to get tough on these protesters. I guess we'll get the specifics soon, but word on the street at Queen's Park is that it could be things like hefty fines, to revoking commercial licenses for these scofflaw truckers. We've seen Premier's language kind of get wrapped boss too. He's called it an illegal occupation. But throughout, he's kind of had sympathy for truckers. And look, like this has obviously devolved from a protest against, a mandatory vaccination for truckers. Like we know that 90% of our truckers are vaccinated. They're delivering our groceries and goods as we speak right now. But this has just kind of become a venue for all of our frustrations with the pandemic and restrictions. And I get it. Like people are angry. It's palpable. And I think that we have seen accusations, certainly from the opposition critics, about how Premier Doug Ford has handled this. He's been accused of being MIA, playing both sides and pandering to anti-lockdown, anti-vax folks. We've got an election campaign in Ontario just a couple of months out. But we have heard the Premier take a bit of a harsher stance in the past on anti-lockdown protests, like much smaller, less disruptive protests at Queen's Park a couple of years ago. He was calling them a bunch of yahoos. So, I think it's time now. The Conservative Party is the party of law and order. Watching these wild times, in Ottawa, having train and blocked off, auto plants shut down. I think it's time, for the Premier to take a harsher stance on this, and I think the public is really ready to see that happen. They're over all this finger pointing. They don't care if it's the feds or the province or the municipalities who's going to handle this. They just want something done.
And I think you're right, and I suspect that playbook, that you have laid out now for the Premier is fairly evident, and if not obvious to anybody who's been kind of paying attention to this. That's not to diminish your insight. My issue here is I agree with you. I think a lot of people would stand behind, Team Sabrina on this and just say, right, what she said. Now, here's the issue. How do you enforce that without this making G20 look like a day in the park?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like day and night, right? Like even in Toronto, with some of the encampments being removed, how we saw how intense that got. Police on horses. Removing the encampments in the summer, and so now I think seeing some of these truckers getting led away in handcuffs, the optics of that, I don't think it's going to be necessarily a bad thing. But again, we can't ignore how people are feeling right now. And kind of the poetic irony, if I can put it that way, is that this is all happening against the backdrop of even more rumors flying around Queen's Park that there's going to be a fast track timeline for reopening, which is what a lot of these protesters want, right? Like, we might hear more about when mask mandates will be lifted. The province initially wanted that to happen in March. They had to backtrack that because of Omicron. We might hear about the future of vaccine passport system. It sounds like the province is leaning towards getting rid of it. And I think there's really only two ways to go there, beef it up or wind it down. And again, there is an election coming up. I don't how much political capital there is to gain, by playing into some of what these protesters want. But it is, I guess, just a bit ironic to me that some of the stuff they're pushing for and digging in against, that the premier, is kind of hinting could be happening, the lifting of these pandemic restrictions. So
Well,
I think, he's condemning the right stuff here, condemning the stuff about, the harassment, the hateful symbols being waved around, but sympathizing with some of the frustration. I mean, I think we all feel that from their perspective. I think, obviously they've gone far here, they are putting more harsh language, calling it illegal occupations, illegal blockades. So, I'm really curious to see where they go with this and what measures can actually be taken. It could mean another state of emergency for Ontario with like bigger sweeping police powers, that type of thing. But I think at this point, it's kind of surprising, and even for international headlines, to see it get to this point right now, where things are and how much of an impact these guys have had.
certainly, and I think, again, to your point, where if you're going to have sweeping police powers, or we're going to sort of beef up this sense of state of emergency, as soon as you go and start to attempt to remove some of those vehicles, you're going to get pushback. And I understand, I'm going to get well, it's not all the same guy. It doesn't matter. You only need 15 people with crowbars, and it becomes a problem. So as soon as this thing turns violent, even in hot spots, there are going to be problems at border crossings right now where we already have demonstrations, because you're going to get a backlash on this. I don't see how they get out from underneath this without it getting really dirty, messy, violent.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, our fate is in the hands of police right now. So I think we have seen the province kind of attack this in different ways. There was sort of this opening salvo this week that the province, okay, so there's some discrepancies, I'll preface it that way. But, the province says that they've successfully got this court order to freeze millions of dollars that this protest has raised. Now, the fundraising website says that Canada has no jurisdiction over this. The province says otherwise. This might get legally a bit complicated, but right now the province is feeling confident that they've at least, put this order in place to stop the use of these funds. We could see things like, confiscation of vehicles, fines. The opposition parties were talking about revoking insurance policies for these guys that are breaking the law, essentially. So I think there's different ways to attack this, but something kind of needs to be done now. Like, obviously the bridges are shut down.
Mm-hmm.
So, the onus is on police and how they handle this. And I think because of what we've seen in Toronto, G20, what we've seen even throughout the pandemic, I mean, there's a lot of room here for things to go bad, no doubt.
Well, and you make a good point in terms of we need it to happen now. And let's just focus back on Ottawa for a minute. The federal Conservatives are insisting that the Prime Minister do something that's urgent. We want a plan by the end of February. I mean, that's 2 weeks from now. So this whole narrative of wait it out, I don't think helps anybody. And we certainly can't be waiting it out given what's going on with the Ambassador Bridge. So I want you to put the crystal ball, focus it for me a little bit, because as you already point out, this is against the backdrop of a election campaign here in Ontario coming up in June. If all of a sudden, and you pointed out this irony, so to speak, we end up with mandates and restrictions pretty much down to zero in a faster fashion than we had otherwise planned or thought, and all the truckers start to cheer and say, yay, they start blowing their horns and go home. But come campaign time, they all start showing up in support of Doug Ford. Is that good political optics?
Well, at election time, I don't think Doug Ford's going to be mad at anyone going to the polls for him. But this has been a field day, especially for the Liberals and the NDP. Because we haven't really heard from the premier, and with all due credit, he's going to be up at the podium there today. But he hasn't been there really to at least be widely available. He's done some media rounds on the radio, but he hasn't had a press conference. He hasn't said what he's going to do. He's just expressed sympathy, and that's really allowed the opposition parties to paint him with this brush of playing both sides. This has even been great for Trudeau. Trudeau's taken a much harsher stance on these protesters than Premier Doug Ford, and we've heard provincially Liberal leader Stephen Del Duca jumping on that. For them to condemn anti-vax, anti-lockdown protesters, if I can just use that blanket term for the so-called freedom convoy right now, that's working for the Liberals. I mean, will it get people out to the polls? Will it shift things in the election? I mean, it remains to be seen. The COVID situation is so volatile right now too. But even the Conservatives, their internal polling has showed that when the COVID situation is bad, like hospitalizations are up, cases are up, things are shut down, people support lockdowns, and the Ford government knows that. So they are kind of walking this fine line here of wanting to sympathize with people who are tired of pandemic restrictions, which all opposition parties are. They're all political parties, I should say, are kind of singing that same line. They understand that people are frustrated with the restrictions. Even our health officials are using that phrase, learning to live with COVID. So everyone wants these lockdowns to end. And of course, I don't know if these protesters are necessarily going about it the right way, but their message, at least that message, is really resonating with, I think, a lot of us.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think question period might be kind of lively that first day back after Family Day.
I sure hope so. I mean, the legislature could come back earlier, but, because they might have to come back just to pass whatever happens to whatever they decide to do with this protest. But I don't think the Ford government wants to be up there grilled by the opposition parties on this. The question period typically gives you those clips of the politicians yelling at each other that you can run on social media. It's just campaign fodder. So I don't know if we'll be coming back early. A lot of this stuff that they're talking about doing, these tougher actions on the protesters can be done through regulation. I'm just being a bit of a procedural nerd now, but for the optics, I think we're not going to come back till question period until we have to.
All right. Well, we will be back next Friday. We're going to stand on the ledge back up because, we're getting ready to pay closer attention on a weekly basis to what's going on in the legislature. So we will talk to you then. Thanks, Sabrina. It's great to talk to you. Good to see you after it feels like a long time off since before Christmas.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
All right, that'll do it. That's the Daily Brief. And if you like what you heard, feel free to follow. Leave us a comment. If you didn't like what you heard, we want to hear the comment all the more. Yeah, it's daily things kind of catching on to the point where we're already into the top 30% of podcasts. So you were in a fairly, you are making the show happen. So thanks. It's good of you to make this part of your audio on-demand routine on a daily basis. And then again, just a reminder, 2 things, looking for stories, another podcast we're going to launch at the end of the month. Every guitar has a story. If you got a story you want to share, find me on the social media, at Dave Trafford on Instagram, on Twitter, and on Facebook. Yeah, that'll do it. The Daily Brief is produced for Story Studio Network by Eye Contact Productions. Talk to you Monday.